Hello students, today we will be discussing the next part of the chapter Sexual Reproduction in Flowering Plants. In the previous video, I discussed the formation of male gametophyte, that is pollen grain, and the female gametophyte, that is the embryo sac. Now, the next step is the transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma. And the transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma is known as pollination. Now the pollen grain may transfer from anther to stigma of the same flower, so it is known as autogamy. And if the pollen grain is transferred from anther to stigma of another flower of the same plant, it is known as geitonogamy. And the transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma of another flower of another plant, it is known as xenogamy. Now this pollination is very important because once the pollen grain is transferred from anther to stigma, then only the next step, that is fertilization, can take place. Now in some plants such as oxalis, they have two types of flowers. One is chasmogamous flowers. These are the normal open flowers that you see everywhere. And the other type of flower is cleistogamous. These are the closed flowers, as you can see here. In chasmogamous flowers, the cross-pollination can take place, that is geitonogamy or xenogamy. But in cleistogamous flowers, only and only autogamy can take place, because inside this closed flower, the anther and stigma are present, and once the anther dies, the pollen grain fall on the stigma inside the flower and pollination takes place, leading to fertilization. So we always have an assured seed set, that means seed will definitely be formed in cleistogamous flowers. Now in cross-pollination, we have certain agents of pollination through which the pollination takes place. They are known as pollinators. Pollination may take place by wind. It is known as anemophily. It may take place by water, which is known as hydrophily. Through insects, known as entomophily, and by birds, which is given the term ornithophily. So we'll be discussing these agents of pollination one by one. Firstly, I'll take up anemophily. So pollination by wind, that is transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma with the help of wind, it is known as wind pollination or anemophily. Now let us see the features of the flower that is adapted to wind pollination. Now how do you think that flower should be, how should be the anther and the stigma in them? So you'll see that the stamens are loosely connected. The reason is that they can be easily flown away by the wind. They are exposed. They are not hidden inside. They are exposed to the wind, so that easily the pollen grains can be taken away by the wind. Next, the pollen grains are very light and non-sticky. They should be light so that they can travel to great distances by the wind. And the stigma is feathery. Why is feathery? So that it can capture the pollen grain. Next, nectar and scent are not present in these flowers because they don't need to attract insects. That's the reason the nectar and scent are not present. And these are the features of wind-pollinated flowers. As you can see here an example, the large anthers on long filaments hang outside the flower. Because they are well exposed, they can be blown away by the wind, and these pollen grains land on the stigma, which is feather-like, so that it can be easily captured by it. Now next we come to water pollination. Water pollination, pollination with the help of water, is also known as hydrophily. So pollination takes place on the surface of water or under the water. So first let us take example of pollination that takes place on the surface of water, and I will take the example of the plant Vallisneria that is shown here. You will see the long stalks in Vallisneria. The female flowers are borne on coiled stalks. This will be coiled like that. But once this female flower matures, it comes up on the surface, as you can see here. This is the female flower. Similarly, the male flower, or we can say the staminate flower, once it matures, it is detached, and as you can see here, it comes on the surface. The pollen grains are then released by these male flowers on the surface of water, and they reach the pistillate flowers, they reach the stigma of the pistillate flower, and the pollination takes place. Once the pollination takes place, again this stalk carrying this female flower, again it will recoil. Now, pollination also takes place under the water, for example, in plants such as sea grasses. The male and female flowers are submerged in water, and it is always the pollen grains that has to reach the stigma. So pollen grains are released in the water, and the large ribbon-like pollen grains that are released under the water, and the female flowers which are underwater, they reach there and the pollination takes place. Now, you will see even in bryophytes and pteridophytes, male gametes are released and pollination takes place only through water. But we can say that it's not important that in all aquatic plants water pollination is required. For example, in water lily, pollination does not take place through water, but it takes place through wind or through insects. Now, next let's discuss insect pollination, which is also known as entomophily. You must have seen the flowers that are attracted by the insects. They are usually bright colored. They have nectar, and the petals are scented, that is to attract the insects. And which is the main pollinator, major pollinator? That are the bees. Now, insects are attracted to brightly colored flower. An example you can see here. Then the stamens are inside the flower. Why it is inside the flower? It is not well exposed like in anemophilous plants, but it is inside, so that whenever the insect will come for the nectar, it can brush past the stamens and pick up the pollen. The pollen sticks on their body. Even the stigma is sticky, so that when insect brushes past, it can stick the pollen grains on it. And what attracts the insects is the brightly colored petals and the nectar. Now, those flowers that are attracted to flies, they secrete a foul odor, that is a bad odor, bad smell. The reason being that flies get attracted to this kind of flowers because you see the flies, they lay eggs on feces. So that is why similarly these flowers also have a foul odor, so that the flies are attracted to it. Now, if we talk about the flowers that the birds are attracted to, such as the hummingbird, so they are also attracted to this brightly colored flowers and they're nectar producing. But they don't have this any scent. The reason being that the birds don't have any sense of smell. So they are similar to the insect pollinated plants. They have nectar, but they don't have this scent because it's not required, as the birds, they don't have any sense of smell. Now, any flower which wants to get itself pollinated, it needs to give some reward so that in turn it gets pollinated. Now, what are the rewards that a flower gives to get pollinated? Firstly is the pollen, because the larvae of the bees and flies, they feed on the pollen, which is rich in protein. As we saw, one of the floral rewards is nectar, which is rich in sugar. Now, some flowers also, they are a safe place for laying eggs. For example, the tallest flower, Amorphophallus. This is the tallest flower, around 6 feet high, and it provides a safe place for laying eggs for the beetles and flies. Next is one more example which I'll take is the moth and yucca plant. Now they have this symbiotic relationship. The moth, that is the insect, it lays eggs on the yucca plant, and its eggs, they get the food and they take shelter on this yucca plant, and in turn the yucca plant gets pollinated. So it's a symbiotic relationship, and they both are dependent for the completion of their life cycle. Now we come to the outbreeding devices. You will see most of the flowers are hermaphrodites. That means they have both the stamen and pistil on the same flower. Now if they have both the stamen and pistil on the same flower, there are more chances of self-pollination, and continuous self-pollination leads to inbreeding depression. That means there is loss of fertility and vigor. So reproductively it will get weaker and weaker. So the flowers have devised a technique for overcoming this inbreeding depression, because it is a disadvantage. Now, what are these outbreeding devices? Outbreeding devices are devices to prevent the inbreeding, because they will lose their reproductive ability with time. Now the first is the pollen release and stigma receptivity are not synchronized. This means that once the pollen releases, then the stigma might not be receptive. Even if the pollen lands on it, it will not germinate to form the pollen tube, because the timing is different. The release of the pollen grain and the receptivity of the stigma is not synchronized. It is not at the same time. Second is the anther and stigma are placed at different positions. Might be the pollen is placed at a lower position and the stigma at the different position, so that pollen cannot land on the stigma of that same flower. Next is self-incompatibility. Self-incompatibility means, as I have shown here, the pollen will not germinate on genetically similar individual. Like here the pollen landed, but you will see it will not lead to germination of pollen tube. Once the pollen tube is not there, the gametes cannot enter, the fertilization will not take place. Next is production of unisexual flowers. That means the flowers are either pistillate or the flowers are staminate. Next, in monoecious condition, that means the male and female flower are present on the same plant. In this condition, autogamy will not take place, though geitonogamy can take place. And in dioecious condition, the flowers, male and female flowers, are placed on different plants, so that will prevent autogamy and geitonogamy, but xenogamy can take place, that is cross-pollination. So at least in these conditions, self-pollination will not take place. So these flowers, the plants have devised certain techniques to prevent inbreeding or self-pollination, and these are the ways that have been, these are the various devices that it has made up to prevent all this inbreeding depression. Once the pollination takes place, that doesn't guarantee that the right type of pollen is deposited on the stigma, because the pollen grain could be compatible or incompatible and stigma can recognize it. So only if it is compatible, the pollen grain is accepted by the stigma, and if it is incompatible, the pollen grain will be rejected. It will be rejected, there will be no germination of the pollen tube. So once the pollen grain is of the right type, it will be accepted by the stigma and it will lead to the germination of the pollen grain, leading to the formation of pollen tube. This pollen tube extends down the style and it will enter the ovule through the micropyle. Micropyle, as I discussed, is a small pore. Now, once this pollen tube reaches, then the next step of fertilization takes place. All the events from pollen deposition on the stigma until the pollen tube enters the ovule are referred to as pollen pistil interaction. Now usually the pollen grain is deposited as the two cell stage that we discussed earlier. What are those two cell stage? Generative cell and vegetative cell. But what happens, sometimes the generative cell, it divides, it undergoes mitosis and it forms the two male gametes. These male gametes travel through the pollen tube and enter the embryo sac, and it will lead to fertilization. Now this pollen pistil interaction is of major concern for the scientists, for the crop breeders. And let's see in the next slide about artificial hybridization. Now what is artificial hybridization? It is a technique which is used to improve the quality of crops with desired characters. Now suppose there are two plants. One is disease resistant plant, one is a high yielding variety. Now the crop breeder, he wants to bring this both the qualities in the progeny. So that progeny will be of superior quality. So we can cross both these plants to have the progeny which will be of superior quality, and this is known as artificial hybridization. So these techniques can be used to improve the quality, improve the yield, have disease resistant plants, etc. Now how does this artificial hybridization take place? Suppose we have a bisexual plant. So before the anthers dehisce, what has to be done? These anthers have to be removed. This removal of anther is known as emasculation. After the anthers are removed, the flowers is covered with a butter paper. Why it is covered? So that it is not contaminated by unwanted pollen. Now once the stigma becomes receptive, it is dusted with the desired pollen grain and again covered until the fruit is developed. Now if a plant is unisexual, so there is no need for emasculation because there are no anther, it's just a pistillate flower. So simply you can just cover it with a butter paper, and this covering of with the butter paper is known as bagging. And then you can dust it with the desired pollen and bring about this. This is how the artificial hybridization takes place. So we are bringing two plants with the desired qualities to have a progeny with superior quality, and that is very beneficial in the crop improvement programs. Now, once the pollination took place, the pollen tube developed and the male gametes enter the embryo sac, now next is fertilization. So there are two male gametes. One male gamete goes and fuses with the egg to form the zygote. The other male gamete will go and fuse with the polar nuclei to form primary endosperm nucleus, which later develops into the endosperm. Now since there is fusion of one male gamete with the egg, which is known as syngamy, fertilization, the other fusion, second fusion taking place of the male gamete with the polar nuclei, so this process is known as double fertilization. We also refer it to as triple fusion because you can see here the three cells are fusing. Which are the three cells? The two antibodies and one male gamete. So this is known as triple fusion. The fusion of one male gamete with two polar nuclei is known as triple fusion, and this fusion of the male gamete with the egg cell, it is to form zygote, is known as syngamy. And since two fertilizations are taking place, it is known as double fertilization. Now fertilization has taken place. Now what are the post-fertilization structures? What are the structures formed after fertilization? We will see the first formation is of that of endosperm, embryo, seed, and finally the fruit. Now endosperm is always formed before the embryo. Why is it so? Because it provides nutrition to the developing embryo. Now endosperm could be of three types: nuclear endosperm, cellular endosperm, and halobial endosperm. Now what happens in nuclear endosperm? is that the nuclear division takes place. The primary endosperm nucleus divides repeatedly without any cell wall formation. So the best example of nuclear endosperm is in the liquid coconut. The liquid that you have in the coconut is an example of nuclear endosperm. And if the cell wall formation takes place with every nuclear division, it is known as cellular endosperm, such as the white part in coconut that you see, that is the cellular endosperm. Next is the halobial endosperm. This is a type of endosperm formation where a cell wall is laid between two nuclei, after which one half develops along the cellular pattern and the other half of the endosperm develops along the nuclear pattern. So that is the halobial endosperm. And as we know, this endosperm is a nutritive tissue for the developing embryo. Now next structure, post-fertilization structure, is the embryo. Here you saw the egg cell fuses with the male gamete to form the zygote. Now once the zygote is formed, it undergoes division and it forms the various structures to form the embryo. Now we are just taking the example of a mature embryo, which is a dicot embryo. The various structures that are formed are the global embryo, heart-shaped embryo, and finally the mature embryo. Let's have a look at the dicot embryo and monocot embryo. In dicot embryo, as the name indicates, dicot, there are two cotyledons. So the two main parts of an embryo are the embryonal axis and the cotyledons. These are the two cotyledons. Now this part which is above the attachment of the cotyledon is known as epicotyle and it ends in the plumule. The part of the embryonal axis below the attachment of the cotyledons is known as hypocotyle and it ends in the radicle, which has a root cap. And if we take the example of this monocot embryo, the structure, you will see here that the cotyledon is referred to as scutellum and it is on one side of the embryo. So the embryonal axis, the part of embryonal axis above the attachment of scutellum is known as shoot apex or epicotyle, and it has a covering protective sheath known as coleoptile. And the part of the embryonal axis which is below the point of attachment of scutellum, it is known as radicle. It ends in root apex and again it has a protective sheath that is known as coleorhiza. So clearly you can see here that the dicot embryo has this embryonal axis, two cotyledons, and monocot embryo, it has the embryonal axis and one cotyledon that is referred to as scutellum. This is just a rudimentary, epiblast is a rudimentary cotyledon that is not formed, which was so it has only one cotyledon. Next important structure is the seed. That is a product of fertilization. You find it inside the fruit. The seed can be albuminous, that is, it retains a part of the endosperm. Example are wheat and maize. Or the seed could be non-albuminous, that means it does not retain any part of the endosperm. Examples are pea and groundnut. And in some seeds, some parts of nucellus remain, and that is known as perisperm. This perisperm are the remnants of nucellus. For example, black pepper. Now as the seed matures, what happens in the seed that the water content becomes lesser and lesser and they dry up. Now this seed can be stored for long periods, like we can just store it, and when the conditions are favorable, when you provide it water and nutrients, it germinates. It has this seed coats for protection, and inside you have this cotyledons, the embryo, and a small opening that is known as micropyle. And it is through micropyle that it takes up the water and oxygen. So the seed when it is dormant, it is used for storage in that condition, and when the conditions are favorable, it can germinate. Next we have the fruits. What is fruit? The ovary develops into the fruit. Now we can classify the fruits into true fruit, false fruit and parthenocarpic fruit. Now if only the ovary is directly taking part in the development of the fruit, it is known as true fruit, for example the mango. But if other part, that is like for example the thalamus, it is also contributing in fruit formation, because usually all the other parts fall off, the other parts of the flower. But if even thalamus is taking part in fruit formation, it is known as false fruit, for example the apple. And some fruits do develop without fertilization. Example is banana. Or here you can see in the mango, which is a fleshy fruit, the pericarp can easily, that is the wall of the ovary, it can be differentiated into epicarp, the middle portion mesocarp, and in a portion endocarp, which is outside the seed coat. But in the apple, which is a false fruit, pericarp is highly reduced. It is not differentiated into the 3 layers as you can see here in the mango, and the major portion of the fruit is formed by the thalamus. Now I'll be discussing with you apomixis, a unique process which you haven't gone through earlier. So this is a process. You have seen earlier that how a seed is formed only after fertilization. But apomixis is a process in which the seeds are formed without the union of gametes. The plant bypasses the most fundamental aspects of sexual reproduction, which are those meiosis and fertilization, and it forms viable seeds. Now, what are the types of apomixis? One is recurrent apomixis. In this, the embryo sac is formed from megaspore mother cell, where meiosis is disturbed and has diploid cells. Now earlier I told you that during the formation of embryo sac, the megaspore mother cell undergoes mitosis. But here what is happening, the embryo sac, it is formed from a megaspore mother cell where meiosis is disturbed and it has diploid cells. Embryo cells are directly formed from diploid cell without fertilization. Second is the non-recurrent apomixis, or here the embryo develops from haploid egg cell without fertilization and the embryo sac is haploid. The third is adventive embryony, or here the embryos develop directly from the cells of either nucellus or integuments. So or here you will see that no fertilization is taking place, like how normally the male gamete fuses with the egg cell to form the zygote which develops into the embryo. Or here the embryo is directly developing from the diploid egg cell without fertilization. Or it can develop from the haploid egg cell if the embryo sac has haploid cells, and embryo develops from haploid egg cell without fertilization, or embryo can develop directly from the cells of either nucellus or integuments. So what is happening here? It is bypassing the 2 main aspects of fertilization, that is meiosis and fertilization. Like for example, in recurrent apomixis, what is happening? The megaspore mother cell doesn't undergo meiosis. This is an example of apomixis. This is the normal sexual reproduction, how it takes place. Or here you can see the megaspore mother cell undergoes meiosis, and then the post-fertilization embryo, double fertilization is taking place, and it results in the formation of seed. Whereas here, a somatic cell acts as aposporous initial. It is simply undergoing mitosis. It forms the aposporous embryo sac. There is no fertilization and it directly develops into a seed. Now, what are the advantages of apomixis in plant breeding? What happens when the farmers are using hybrid seeds? They need to purchase it every year. But in case of apomixis, if the apomictic seeds are used, there is no need for the producers to purchase these every year. And secondly, what happens that a breeding tool to develop hybrids that can retain their original genetic properties indefinitely with repeated use. When they use the seeds obtained from hybrid plants, so there is segregation of the characters. But on using apomictic seeds, the original genetic properties are retained indefinitely. Even you can use them repeatedly. But whereas in hybrid seeds, they have to be purchased for the farmers every year, and they are very expensive. Effective system for the rapid production of pure lines. Pure lines means that we will get the same plants with the same genetic composition, generation after generation. Now the next topic is polyembryony. What is polyembryony? As the name indicates, that means there are many embryo inside the seed. So if there is more than one embryo in a seed, it is referred to as polyembryony. For example, you must have seen in the seeds of the citrus plant that the nucellar, what happens in that, the nucellar cells surrounding the embryo sac, they start dividing and they get into the embryo sac, they protrude into the embryo sac, and this results in the formation of several embryos. So how these embryos are being formed? They are being formed from the nucellar cells. It is a type of apomixis. And what is the importance of this polyembryony? It is of high advantage in plant breeding and horticulture. And these nucellar embryos, they are free from diseases. So they are highly advantageous. So we can have disease-free plants when they are propagated. And again, they provide genetically uniform seedlings. So that was all about this chapter, sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Thank you.